Public improvement hearing for the Pinnaker Lake Estates area and surrounding streets, basalt, 214th, 215th, Dolomite, 214th Court, and 215th Court, known as Pinnaker Lake Estates. So the meeting opened. And microphone's back on.
Mr. Mayor, if you'd like, I can start by giving a brief presentation on the project.
Engineer Shane Nelson. First of all, we welcome people. This is something new to us as a city. Hasn't been done since we've been a city, so fortunately we all get to participate here. So we're going to have Shane walk us through it, and there'll be time for opportunity to comment here, I believe.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So first of all, the project location is basically what we call the Pinnaker Lake development. All the roads highlighted in red here, but they're all roads that are constructed with the original development. A little bit of background. So now that it owns and maintains about 34 miles of paved road and 20 miles of gravel road. The total length of this project is just over 0.8 of a mile. So you can see it's just a fraction of what the city is responsible for maintaining. And one thing that we always hear when we have public improvement hearings is, isn't there enough money to fund this project in its entirety and not levying assessments? There's just not enough money. If the city were to do that, they have to raise their levy so high that your taxes would severely increase. So it's projects such as this are funded as a percentage of city funding and a percentage of funding through the benefiting properties through assessments. One other thing is this project is programmed for 2018, pending what we hear tonight from the residents. The pavement's about 17 years old. Overall, it's in fair condition, but it's starting to show some signs of age. So there's starting to be some pattern cracking. The road was previously chip sealed. And so what we're talking about tonight is an overlay kind of at a strategic time to extend the pavement life and avoid more expensive repairs in the near future. So this is an actual photograph of your road, and the one thing that I want to point out is this pattern cracking right here. So this isn't very severe yet, but it's an indication that the road is starting to starting to lose some of its strength, and if we don't do something soon, that's going to continue to propagate and to develop. Here's another picture. This section is actually in pretty good condition. I don't see see any of that pattern cracking. This one, we're noticing the pattern cracking kind of in the middle of the roadway. And on this one, we're seeing it really on this whole half of the roadway. So these cracks here are what's concerning to me and why this was identified as a possible improvement project. Now, I would say that pavement is designed generally for a 20-year life. We're on year 17, so if we just did nothing, the roadway, it would very likely last its 20 years. The problem is if we just let it kind of run that course, then again, a more expensive repair is needed. So just a little bit of a quick 101 on pavement management. This is what pavement looks like when it's new. You can see it's kind of a darker black appearance. And you really can't see any aggregate. That's because bituminous is made of a mixture of rock, oil, and sand. And so that oil and the sand particles, they all bind together and kind of make the surface smooth. But over time, that deteriorates. And over time, your road surface looks like this. And one thing that happens when you lose the layer of oil and sand, you lose some of the resilience of the pavement or the pliability. because that surface is drying out. So by constructing an overlay, it helps to kind of rejuvenate that surface. If we do nothing, it probably won't happen next year or maybe the year after, but relatively soon those random cracks will continue to develop until they look something like this. This is called Elliegator cracking, and when it gets to this point, we're only maybe a couple freeze thaw cycles away from some of that bituminous starting to pop out and cause potholes. So why does the cracking, what happens? Hopefully this illustration kind of paints the picture. When you have a crack in the bituminous, it's a direct conduit for the water to get down into the aggregate base. And what happens is that aggregate base gets down, or the water gets down in the aggregate base and it saturates it. Whenever any material is saturated, it makes it soft. Then you apply a vehicle load to it, and it bends the pavement until it cracks. That's why once you start to have that cracking, it generally expands fairly fast. Another thing that can happen is when the water during the winter months, when you maybe have snow and then it gets warmer during the day, you'll have freezing and thawing, so that water or the snow might melt, run into the cracks. At night again, the temperatures drop, it freezes, water expands 8% in volume, or actually that says 9% in volume. When it freezes, so then that has an upward pressure on it. And that's a lot of times when you drive on the road and you feel those bumps every time you can a lot of times feel it on faster county roads or not. But that's generally what that is. It's called tenting of the pavement. So there's been a lot of study and research done on pavement and how it reacts, because we just spend so much money on our roads here in the state of Minnesota. And so this is actually from a research paper. And one thing that's interesting is your first 40% drop in quality generally happens over 75% of the pavement's life. So for about 3/4 of the pavement's life, it's in pretty good condition. You only see 25% drop in quality over that first, so if it's a 20-year pavement, over that first 15 years. Once cracks start to develop and water gets into the base, then it declines rather quickly after that. And your next 40% drop in quality happens over 12% of the pavement life. So it's a curve that starts out kind of flat, and then as pavement starts to deteriorate, it really deteriorates more rapidly. The other thing that I like to point out is $1 in renovation at this point will cost $8 to $10, or $8 to $100, I'm sorry, if you let it go until the most expensive repair is needed. So what we're trying to do now is catch a pavement when it's somewhere up here. It's starting to show some signs. It's like we said, it's 17 years old out of its 20-year life. We're trying to renovate the pavement for less money than if we just let it continue to deteriorate and eventually fall apart. So this is another nice chart. It kind of shows treatment ban costs. Obviously doing nothing is the least expensive. The routine maintenance like crack filling and whatnot, that is so inexpensive that it doesn't even show up on the chart very well. There is a cost there, but it's a small cost. What we're talking about tonight is a structural improvement, and the cost of structural improvements usually run around $180,000 per mile. If we wait and let it go to where the next improvement is needed, which is a reconstruction of the surface, where the pavement is no longer salvageable, we have to grind up that pavement and pave a new bituminous mat on top of that. The price about doubles to right around $360,000. And if we wait again until a total reconstruction is needed, which is the most extensive type of repair, it about doubles after that. So again, we're trying to do the most cost-effective thing at the right time. So what we are proposing is to construct a bituminous overlay, 2 inches in thickness. That bituminous overlay will add structural strength. It's going to give you an improved ride. It's going to extend the service life. The general rule of thumb for an overlay is 10 years, but in practice, I see them extending the service life much more than that, maybe closer to 15 or 20 years. And since we're doing a lower cost improvement and potentially doubling that pavement's life, we're going to see a much lower life cycle cost. Also included in the project is matching driveways, and then we will also measure all of your mailboxes, make sure that they're within the USPS requirements, so you don't have a slip from your mail carrier stating that your mailbox is out of compliance. So again, that red line is kind of the typical pavement deterioration curve. What we're trying to do is interrupt that curve. The city does do crack filling. Those would be those little interruptions. But really, we're here at about actually at year 17, but we're proposing a structural overlay to bring that pavement so it looks like new again, and again, add structural strength so we can extend that pavement curve out the longest life possible. So the engineer's estimate for this project is $149,000. And again, this is kind of the project area. The projects that would benefit, or the properties that would benefit from this project are labeled with the blue numbers. There are 25 properties total that would benefit from this project and would be proposed to be assessed. The city has chosen a per unit assessment method. There are other assessment methods such as front foot and whatnot, but generally in residential areas, all properties use the road about equally. And per unit assessment is usually the fairest method for residential properties. So with that, spread in that $149,000 cost over the 25 benefiting properties, the city is proposing to pay 50% of the project cost, and that would result in an assessment amount of $2,980 per unit. So that could be paid in full after the project is complete, or it could you could simply go on to your taxes. It's generally amortized over time, generally for a period of 10 years. And one other thing to note is right now the interest rates are favorable. They've been at historic lows and they're starting to rise. So now would be a good time to consider.
Shane, can I interrupt? You're coming for the improvement hearing on Old Viking, that starts at 8 o'clock. We're finishing up an improvement hearing on Pinnaker Lakes. So.
Oh, we're early.
You're early. Thank you for coming early. You're welcome to come back if you want, or wrap up in this one. Sorry, Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. And so this just kind of shows a preliminary schedule. There are several steps required in order to complete a public improvement hearing such as this. And this just kind of outlines some of the steps that still have to occur in order for this project to become a reality. So tonight, we're at March 20th, public improvement hearing. The council will listen to your input tonight, make a decision on whether or not to do the project, assuming that they hear generally favorable responses. Their next step would be to order plans and specifications. To take my office probably 3 to 4 weeks to complete those plans and specifications. They then be presented to the city council for approval, at which point they would authorize advertisement for bids. We would then go out and publicly bid this project, seeking as many bids as we can to get the best possible price. Probably the earliest we could have a bid opening would be in June. We would likely hold an assessment hearing fairly quickly after that, after we knew the actual project costs and the actual contractor bids. And
Shane, can we just say that, so this is your first opportunity here at an improvement hearing to weigh in on this, get some information and give some initial feedback. Should we decide to go ahead, as Shane said, with those other steps, then you would have another opportunity at this time, the assessment hearing that would come up after we know what all the cost would be. So then you'd have a true cost and a true understanding of what the assessment would be, and you'd have another opportunity to weigh in. So this is not your last opportunity to weigh in, it's really your first opportunity to hear what we're thinking and share with us what your thoughts are, and then should we go ahead, we would get all the costs together and you'd give you another presentation with all the cost, and you can weigh in once again. So this is not the last opportunity, so don't panic.
Mr.
Please.
Mayor, if I could just add to your comment. The time that I cannot, as the town attorney, or the city attorney, the only time I can't get the full breaks is when they award the contract. So, and that typically won't happen until after that second public hearing, which is called the assessment hearing, that the mayor was talking about. So even though they talk about ordering the improvement and going forward with ordering plans and specs and so forth, the time that I can no longer put the brakes on this project is when they actually award the contract to a contractor after getting the lowest responsible bid. That's when the project goes forward. Until that time, it won't happen until after you've had that second public hearing and ability to weigh in.
Yeah, so when you hear us ordering the improvements, we're not moving ahead, we're getting the numbers so we can present it once again to the residents. So there is an opportunity to, as the attorney said, until that is all done and there's another assessment hearing, you get to weigh in again. There's still opportunities to have discussions.
Thank you, Mayor Pilon and Attorney Rupi. So that would put a possible date for an assessment hearing right around June of this year. The earliest that construction would probably start would be July. July is a perfect time to construct overlays. You generally get a better finished product when the weather is warmer. And this project is probably only going to take maybe 10 to 14 working days. So it's certainly not going to take from July 1st until September of 2018. But generally what we like to do is give the contractor, be the most flexible in our schedule as we can. We generally select September 1st because that's right around when school starts. So we try to get our public improvement projects completed before school starts. But it would likely only take, like I said, 1 to 2 weeks to construct the project. So I've presented at enough public improvement hearings. I've always heard the question, what happens if we delay the project? Can't we just wait a year or two? And if the project is delayed, what will likely happen is the pattern cracking that we pointed out in the pictures will continue to develop or become slightly worse each year. At some point, it'll get to the point where an overlay is no longer the right treatment method. It would be the next treatment method, which would be called the reconstruction of the surface, which is when they come in with a reclaiming machine, actually grind up the pavement, and then pave a new bituminous mat. Potholes will eventually develop, so you have a decreased ride or decreased level of service, and as time goes on, the repairs will just become more expensive. One other thing to note, right now you have a city council that has spent a lot of time looking at some road improvement projects. They are seemingly willing to go ahead and do a public improvement project, and that could change. It's not a guarantee, but right now the proposal is a 50% cost share with the city. And in the past, a lot of these projects were done with 100% assessment to the benefiting properties. Some of the council members sitting before you actually received assessments of 100% of the project cost. So with that, that's the end of my short presentation. I'll go back and sit down. Most likely the attorney will give a few words. When you do, if you do have any comments, we just ask that you step up to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Jane, could you grab the microphone there too, please? Attorney Rupie, would you care to?
Just to make sure everybody's on the same page, as the city engineer and the mayor have stated, this is the first of the two required public hearings. This is called what they call the improvement hearing, public improvement hearing. And this is your opportunity, after you've learned a little bit about the project, to be able to give your feedback back to the city council before they've taken any action, in order to let them know what your thoughts are regarding whether this project is needed or not. The city council, you guys unfortunately don't get to vote on this. It's still something that's reserved for your city council, but they do want to listen to your feedback and decide whether this goes forward or not. If it does go forward, it's probably along the timelines as the engineer pointed out in his presentation. At some point in time, once the plans and specs have been approved, it goes out to bid. We get the bids back, then we would actually know kind of, right now, everything you've heard today is an estimate. And we need to make sure you understand that. Once the bids come back, then we'd have the actual numbers. We'd be able to do the math. You will be sent a notice in the mail, and at that point in time, you would get what they call the actual amount proposed to be assessed. And generally, in these types of cases, and what the council is considering, is doing it over a 10-year period. So right now, the estimate from the engineer, based on past construction practices, is $2,980. At some point in time, probably around June, we will actually know the true number based on the lowest responsible bid that we get, and we would share that information with you. And then we'd hold another hearing where you would be able to give feedback to the city council about whether that's an appropriate number or not. And then after that, the council would have to decide whether to, what they call, award the contract. At that point in time, that's the time I was talking about where I have no longer able to, once we award the contract, somebody expects to get paid and they'll sue us if they don't get paid. So that's the point of no return on this project, even though you'll hear the terms of art awarding going forward with the improvement and ordering plans and specs and so forth. That's really that, when we award the contract to a contractor and they expect to get paid, that's the point where this contract basically goes. Every place else, we can put brakes on. So tonight is your opportunity to ask questions of the engineer about the project, to get a little bit better familiarity with it, and to give feedback to this city council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So at this point, if anybody would like to share, again, you may not have spoken before a council before, you may not have spoken like this. We want you to be relaxed and let us know politely what you think. And we're here to collect information tonight. This is an opportunity for the residents to weigh in and be part of the process. So we welcome your input.
Hello there.
Hello.
Chad Brannon, 21457 Dolomite Street in Pinnaker Lake Estates. One thing I noticed on there, you were talking about that we're at year 17 of our 20-year life cycle, and this is going to add an additional 10 years onto the overall life cycle, which would bring it up to, I'm assuming, 30 years, give or take. In regards to that, we're going to be getting 13 years worth of life out of what's being invested, as opposed to a possible 20-year life for something that would be a service reconstruction. Is there a possibility for doing something that's more substantial in getting a bid on that as well, to see what that would come back as? So it might be more attractive to the property owners from the standpoint of resale value, and we won't have to go through it again, in a possible short period of time.
Mr. Mayor, I can address that question if,
Okay.
The next level of repair would be a reconstruction of the surface, which would again be about twice the cost and therefore twice the assessment. It would be possible for the city to receive bids on that, but at this point, it's my opinion that we are not there yet. So, my recommendation would be to construct a bituminous overlay at this time, and it is a 2-inch overlay, just to add a little bit of extra structural strength, as opposed to some cities might only do an inch and a half overlay. That, in my experience, when we overlay roads, and a lot of the roads that I've overlaid earlier in my career have passed that 10-year mark now, and they still look better than when they were originally overlaid. So even going on year 12 or 13 or 14, they still look better than before that project was done. So my recommendation would be to continue with the overlay, and then at some point, maybe it's 15 or 20 years in the future, then we look at the next repair, reconstruction of the surface.
And so Shane, what you're saying is, and you said in your presentation, you're looking at this being a minimum of 10 years, but reasonably, because if we can catch it in time now before we deteriorate any more than we have, this could be 15 and even up to 20 years with proper crack seal and regular maintenance that we do.
That's correct.
So we're thinking this is the most cost-effective for the longest improvement without doubling the cost and doing something more. So it's reasonably going to last more than 10 years. The engineer's just not going to guarantee it.
Gotcha. So is there any sort of warranty that goes along with that then? From, typically from the companies that are doing the project that we could expect?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, there's typically a 1-year warranty.
And in this, you oversee the project as well. So the engineering firm will also oversee that it's being laid properly. They'll work with reputable firms. And as Shane said, we're looking at a 2-inch overlay rather than the thinner mat that some cities do. We're looking at catching it in time, by catching it before the deterioration is severe, catching it in time and going with the heavier mat, and it's under the supervision of the engineering firm that which we have used the entire time we've been a city. I mean, they have had our best interest in mind, and they do oversee the projects.
So were they the company that did the original project?
No, that would have
They
been the developer, I believe.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bettinger.
and Shane can correct me if I'm wrong, but a reclaim and overlay typically would probably last about the same length of time, about 15 to 20 years again. So by spending twice the money, you're really not, at this point, you wouldn't be gaining twice the life.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chad. Thanks for breaking the ice for us here.
Hi, Scott Davis, 6625 215th Avenue. Mr. Mayor and City Council members, a couple questions. So nobody likes paying taxes. Nobody likes paying for their roads. How was the 50% determined?
How was it determined?
Dartboard or?
Yeah, well, as Shane had mentioned before, the previous practice, it had been 100%. And so we were looking at something that was reasonable in our estimation, a reasonable cost that was less than 100%. But what we're doing here is starting a 5-year plan. We've had the Road and Bridge Committee that meets monthly, and they put together a plan. So they've worked with our Public Works manager here to go out and evaluate all of the paved streets that are responsibility of the city and put together an evaluation to tell us what roads are in worse shape, which roads need which types of repairs, and which ones we can reasonably reclaim. And so one of the things that we looked at is, in this 5-year plan, we've got to come up with something that's reasonable to all residents. And so in some cases, that 50%, maybe twice as much as what this project is estimating. So we're trying to evaluate what we're doing over 5 years and saying what's a reasonable shared cost that the city can afford and keep this project going forward without excessive levy cost to everybody, and still share the cost with those homes that directly benefit from the improvement. So it really was a number that was determined based on the overall projects that we're looking at doing over the next 5 years.
Okay. So there's a statute 429 that says it has to increase the value of our homes equal to or more than what the price of the assessment is. Was that taken into consideration?
That was discussed. I don't know, Bob, if you want to
Yeah,
mention that?
the city engineer and I do a lot of these projects, and we look at these. Generally, this is consistent with the benefit we see in other communities. If somebody determines to challenge the assessment, it's presumed valid under Minnesota law, and the property owner would have the burden of proving that, in fact, their property didn't benefit by the amount. And how is that determined? It's done by professional appraisers.
Okay,
And so basically, if it's challenged, normally we have at court, we have the city road supervisor and somebody from the council usually talks about what they've done on the project, why it's needed, the engineer testifies, but it's really the appraisers. And we look to see what is your property value according to the appraisers before with the road that needs improvement, what would that be, and then what's it get appraised at after? And a judge then makes the decision. And typically, most of the times I've done it, the last couple of times I've been challenged, the judges have held what the city or the township have done.
So you guys-
But that's what the benefit test is.
so you guys didn't really do any math to see if it was making sense, you're just hoping that we don't sue?
No, I wouldn't say that, because I already saw from the feasibility report that the engineer had put together, I already reviewed that, and I looked at what I have been successful at for the same types of projects in other communities. And trust me, because I'm the person who has to go into court and defend this, if I see something that's out of line, I tell the city or the town very quickly, you're out of line, you've got to do something. Either you have to spend more of your city money to buy down that assessment, because I can't defend that in court.
Okay,
But have we done a full-blown appraisal? No. Have I done that in the past? When I'm really in doubt, a lot of times especially with commercial property or something, and I'm not sure how the benefit plays out, in this case, I'm basing it based on the past experience I've had for 30 years of being a city and town attorney, and so I kind of know what the going rate is.
okay.
And, Mr. Mayor, if I could just quickly,
Shane, yes.
one thing to keep in mind is that the assessment amount they're proportionate to a lot size. So if you were in a city with a city-sized lot that only had 75 feet of frontage, yeah, the assessment amount might be slightly lower, but it's still proportionate.
Sure, hey, we are big
Right,
lots.
you all have big lots, and
Yeah.
so it does
Appreciate
make
that.
the assessments higher per parcel.
Okay. One of the comments I've heard other people make is it 213th has a huge pothole in it, bigger than anything on our roads. Why wasn't that brought into the assessment? So between Basalt and Xenon, there's a huge pothole we
Oh.
all drive around. That's worse than our streets. Why aren't we addressing that one?
Mr. Mayor, if I could, I know the section of road that you're talking about, and that road, that area really needs a cutout and a patch. And so it's just a bad spot of the road, and the entire length of 213th isn't up for an improvement yet. And I can't speak on whether or not the maintenance department has any maintenance activities planned for 213th, but that would be more of a maintenance activity, repairing a pothole.
And we do have within our budget for those isolated spots where there's a frost heave in the spring, or there's a larger pothole, that part of what Joe and his crew do, is go out there and either take care of that themselves, or we contract that out on a smaller basis with some of the funds that we set aside every year as part of our levy, our base for we do have a blacktop portion of our budget. So we do have repairs of that sort in there, but this was more significant in the dollars that are necessary to work all of these roads through in the next 5 years. So,
Okay. I appreciate your help. Thank you.
thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, it's Keith Lawrenson, 6570 215th Avenue Northwest. If if this project were completely funded by the city, I would probably still not be advocating to get this done. Certainly not with paying for 50% of the assessment. There is, although there's 25 properties, there's probably several people, and there might not be represented here or even been aware of it because there's no structures on some of those properties. And then also there's some on the other end of the property that use maybe less than 100 feet of the road that's going to be surfaced. I'd say I would support allowing it to extend towards its 20-year lifespan and continue using the road as is. Thank you.
Thank you. As long as, you know, I don't know what the normal process is, but Keith, you were saying you'd be opposed even if the city was paying it the full amount and leave it to the 20-year life expectancy. Can you explain any more of the logic there? I mean, if we let it go to 20 years and it deteriorates and now we do have to do something, what would you?
Just looking as a taxpayer for the taxes that we pay, and maybe having that used somewhere else where it could maybe benefit somebody else, or maybe a more degraded condition, or whatever the council decides where those funds go. There may be some better areas to spend those dollars. Where I drive on that road every day, all day, 365 days a year, and it's not in a condition that disrupts my life. I don't, the worst condition, as the condition deteriorates, it slows traffic down, which is not a bad thing in my opinion, but obviously there's other concerns there. But just being responsible for the taxes that we pay and having it put where it's most used. So
Does it change your thoughts if, as we talked about, if it does deteriorate at the 20-year mark, approximately the 20-year mark, to the point that we would have to do something, but it would be twice as expensive as that point? At that point, are we, any sense we're kicking the can down the road and it's going to be more expensive to the taxpayers later?
well, just trying to do the equation where if we're going to get 10 years of life, and maybe, you know, that's not a guarantee either, but we're supposed to get 20 years out of the original life, and we're sitting here at 17 talking about, you know, assessing each one of the homeowners $3,000 roughly for a lifespan that didn't quite make the mark. So it's just
And I will say that the lifespan, I think, is normal. You're seeing it normal deterioration at 17 years. I mean, we would expect, correct me, Shane, if I'm wrong here, that we would expect about this type of deterioration at 17 years. Is why we're trying to be proactive to get this to extend to, 15, 20 more years, 10 to 20 more years, by catching it before it gets too far down and have the minimum cost now at the maximum value of it. But I would say this road is consistent with what we would expect at 17 years.
That's correct. And it will, if nothing is done, it will continue, I have no doubt that it'll reach 20 years, the original design life. It's just as, each rain event, each freeze thaw cycle, we're gonna experience more and more cracking, and that pattern cracking is going to expand. And eventually, potholes will develop.
when it was chip sealed, that was just a few years ago. Was that part of normal maintenance? And can we get it chip sealed again in the event to try and get that usability to extend?
We do crack seal every other year, typically. We do the southern half of the city one year and the northern half the next. And so it's been our pattern to crack seal to try and continue to prevent large scale deterioration. I don't know if we've actually seal coated that,
It was a few years ago
did we?
that we did.
So there was a chip seal done?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, this road has been chip sealed, Boy, I've been working out here since 2004, 2005-ish, and it was already chip sealed when I was, started here, so it was before, my time. I think it was done originally by the developer. And a chip seal at this point, chip seals, I normally, support them, but it really doesn't do anything for structural strength. Chip seal helps with one of the earlier slides that I showed of the surface degrading. But the cracks, they'll continue to develop and continue to let water in, even if a chip seal is applied now.
And we have talked at the Road and Bridge Committee about the value of chip sealing. There's still some discussion on, obviously it has to be done at the right time and what we can do to prolong the life of the road. But if we're beyond that point now, then yes, we'd be putting good money after bad potentially, so.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for your inputs. Anybody else?
Hi, everybody. John Ketchum at 6709, 215th Court, Northwest. I half support it because it makes sense that we do 2 inches to prolong the life. It makes sense in terms of cost benefit. The reason it doesn't make sense to me is it's hard enough to, it's hard to get internet speed that actually works. But we're okay with spending money on a road that we already have. So, I mean, it's kind of it's 50-50 for me. I was told that for our area, just the Pinnaker Estates, because we don't have fiber coming into our node, we have copper, that the rest of the city has fiber coming into their nodes. We can only get 10 a house, which is like impossible to get to the 21st century if you have 10 meg internet. So that's, I guess, my feelings for it.
And just to clarify that from the internet speed, the city is at the mercy of the providers, and right now CenturyLink is the provider. And they are supposedly working on the fiber and the copper issues. Separate issue because the city it has no financial investment in that. We can continue to encourage their improvement, but it's a separate issue from where the city's spending money on the road improvement while we're still encouraging the high-speed internet throughout. There's been dramatic improvement in many parts of the city over this last year, but obviously there's still those neighborhoods that are suffering from 20th century technology. So, and we are quite aware of it, but it is completely separate from where the city's spending no money on that, and the city is spending money maintaining roads and so we'll take your half support anyway, so thank you. Anybody else? If anybody else wants to think about it, our contact information is available through the city. Our emails, our phone numbers. If you want to send something in, you don't want to get up and speak tonight, but you have a discussion when you go home, you want to think about it. Certainly, as a council, we are willing to continue to take information. You can send it, hard copy, electronic copy, to the city offices, or contact us individually if you want to have further discussion. Again, there will be another public hearing, approximately the June timeframe. All residents that will be affected will be notified again. There'll be an opportunity at that point, should we decide to move ahead, we will have actual cost. So you will have another chance to weigh in. And obviously, if you look around, this is not everybody that's represented on this neighborhood map here. So feel free to discuss with your neighbors as well and give them our numbers. So if they weren't here tonight, we're on YouTube. You can see this entire meeting on YouTube. I encourage them to watch it and weigh in with the council members. Appreciate your attendance unless anybody else has any further input they would like at this point. Anybody on the council? All right. With that said, we will close this improvement hearing on the Pinnaker Lake Estates. And set up for our next hearing.